Hello and welcome. This is Matthias 76. Together, we are decoding the deception, and we are today continuing our journey through the book of Acts. Been away for a little while doing some things for the Christmas season, videos for the Christmas season, and now we're back into Acts, and we're picking up here in chapter 21, verse 37. And I just want to do a quick review to get us up to speed, since we are jumping back in for a few. Paul had returned to Jerusalem, and you'll remember as he went to Jerusalem, every prophet and his brother was telling Paul, you're going to end up in chains. And Paul knew that. The Spirit was telling him he was going to end up in chains. But he knew that was what he was supposed to do, was to return to Jerusalem. And so, guess what? Gets to Jerusalem, and we're just really doing the highlights here. He gets to Jerusalem, and he's ended up in chains. We pick up today, he has been arrested. He went to the temple. Some guys fulfilled their vows. Make vows. When you had completed the period of time, go to the temple and make sacrifice. Paul was the one who was paying for the sacrifices, showing everybody still all for the temple and all that. He's not against it, because there were rumors that he was into what we study today. But he's there. Some people who had seen him in Asia, that's not Hong Kong or Beijing, that's Ephesus, places like that, saw him and falsely accused him of bringing Gentiles into the temple, which was way more than taboo. You did not do out in the temple. Only male Jews were allowed in the true part of the temple. There was a court for Gentiles. There was a court for women. Only Jewish men went into the temple. So they have arrested him. Crowd was going berserk. The Roman guardians there hear about it and come rushing in and arrest him. They know nothing about what is going on. I'm going to go ahead and pull up on the screen. This is the Antonia Fortress. Okay. This was at the one corner, I can't remember, of the Temple Mount, and it was occupied by Romans. Okay. So it's an ornate, beautiful part of that amazing wonder of the ancient world temple. The Romans had a presence there, showing they're in charge. If I remember right, I think Herod had built this for himself, and the Romans took it over for themselves after he was gone. Don't hold me to that. But this is just a artist's drawing of it. Make no doubt it was spectacular and glorious, because everything that evil creep Herod did was spectacular and glorious. This is where the Roman soldiers were, right there on the temple grounds. And it also afforded them of every. They were like sitting there, not sitting there on the wall, but as part of the structure. Here's this huge Roman presence reminding the Jews, we're large and in charge. We're here. Because if revolt was likely to start or anything like that, it might well be at the temple, but it also gave them a view of the whole city. Strategic position. This plays a key role in our discussion today, because they're going to rush out from here to go and seize Paul. They did that at the end of our last session. They rushed out from here to go get Paul, and this is where Paul's going to end up, right there, still on the temple grounds. So we'll pick up. As Paul was about to be brought into the barracks, he said to the tribune, "May I say something to you?" And he said, "Do you know Greek? Are you not the Egyptian, then, who recently stirred up a revolt and led the 4,000 men of the assassins out into the wilderness?" Paul replied, "I am a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no obscure city. I beg you, permit me to speak to the people." And when he had given him permission, Paul, standing on the steps, motioned with his hand to the people, and when there was a great hush, he addressed them in the Hebrew language, saying, stop there. So this takes place where he's been arrested. They go and grab him. There's a huge mob. There were always people at the temple, but there's this huge mob, and the Romans thought he was going to be killed if they didn't go get him. And they've brought him up these steps. So now he's up here. This is where he's speaking to the people. They're all down here. And it says he waved his hand. It's a very forceful gesture. He's saying, waving his arm, like, chill out, quiet down. They're curious, so they stop, and they're going to listen to him. It's got this odd thing here. The Roman centurion just made an assumption. There's been this thing, whatever. We know nothing about it. This Egyptian who stirred up a revolt and led the 4,000 men of the assassins out into the wilderness. And Paul replied, no, I'm a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no obscure city. This matters. This matters. And it should have been conveyed to others. And we'll talk about it when it becomes crucial. And he wants to speak to the people. So the centurion says, okay, this guy's a well-spoken guy, probably speaking to the centurion in perfect Greek. Remember, all these people were multilingual. Definitely the educated. I would not surprise me if Paul was conversant in Latin. Okay, he asked to speak. The guy says he can speak, so he waves down the crowd. Be quiet. Just chill out, and he's going to speak to them. Now, but we'll go ahead and jump into the address. Brothers and fathers, hear the defense that I now make before you. And when they heard that he was addressing them in the Hebrew language, they became even more quiet. Let's stop there. He speaks to them, it says in the Hebrew language here, and you look at the note. If you do, it'll say Hebrew dialect, probably Aramaic. This is also unfamiliar to us. Okay. Your average Jew didn't speak Hebrew as their day-to-day language. They had long since, because I'm not even going to try to go over all the history, started using Aramaic, which is it's a related language, another Semitic language, very close to Hebrew, probably their own dialect of it, okay? But they also all spoke Greek. Why? We've talked about this numerous times, because of not Herod the Great, Alexander the Great, who had conquered the whole world. They all spoke Greek. All these people are going to speak Aramaic. The Bibles that they read from, you have to remember this. They use the Septuagint. The Septuagint, that's right here. So this is the Septuagint. There's Daniel 7:13 in the Septuagint. We'll look at something else. This was their Bible. When Jesus quotes the Bible in the Gospels, he quotes the Septuagint. The apostles, they quote the Septuagint. That was the Bible that they used. The scholarly, the more educated, also would read it in Hebrew. Okay? Very confusing for all of us, but that's the way their world worked. He starts off, brothers and fathers. Okay? He's connecting with the crowd, right? He's connecting with the crowd, so they know he's one of them, all of that. Very true. This is the exact address with which Stephen started his speech to the Jews who had arrested him, that resulted in his stoning. And we will recall that when he was stoned, and this is the beginning of his speech, and Stephen said, brothers and fathers, hear me. The God of glory appeared, etc. Paul was the one at whose feet they laid the coats, the men who were stoning Stephen. Why did they stone Stephen? Now, the real reason is one thing. The charge against him was what? That he spoke against the temple. And we'll get to that. He had spoken against the temple, this holy place. And that whole long sermon that he delivers in Acts 7 winds up right there about the temple. Okay? Paul's there in the temple. Paul, the guy who then went on a rampage working to wipe out the church. It is no accident that Paul chooses to use the same introduction to his speech, because he was there when Stephen spoke. Used the same introduction of his speech to the Jews as they had used. What might that tell us about what maybe Paul was expecting? But he's definitely identifying and connecting with Stephen, possibly thinking that he himself is going to end up dead. Because he said he didn't know the outcome. Every time everybody said, don't go, he said, I don't know what waits for me, but other than chains, but I know I'm supposed to go. So he's speaking in Hebrew, Aramaic, whatever it was. They all hushed down because he's one of them. Okay. Somebody else wouldn't have spoken to him in their own language. I am a Jew, born in Tarsus of Cilicia, brought up in this city and educated at the feet of Gamaliel. He says it again, born in Tarsus of Cilicia. And we'll keep planting that seed because we're like, so what? Born in Tarsus of Cilicia. What does that matter? But he's brought up here at the feet of Gamaliel, and Gamaliel was the teacher of teachers, very respected Pharisee. Okay? According to the strict manner in the law of our fathers, being zealous for God as all of you are this day, I persecuted this way to the death, binding and delivering to prison both men and women, as the high priest and the whole council of elders can bear me witness. Paul will do this very often. Like, this is public record. And it's not so long in the past that they wouldn't all remember it. He's identified who he is. He wasn't some minor player. People knew who he was, and they certainly knew about what had happened with him. Okay? But he's saying, ask the council, the Sanhedrin. They can tell you that all of this is true. From them I received letters to the brothers, and I journeyed toward Damascus. Take those also who were there and bring them in bonds to Jerusalem to be punished. Public record. Everybody knew. Now he's going to recount what happened to him on the way, because this was not part of what everyone knew. But he's making his defense. Okay, he's putting it out there. This is what I'm about. This is what was going on. This is why I was here. He's not going to get to finish. As I was on my way and drew near to Damascus about noon, a great light from heaven suddenly shone around me, and I fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to me, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And I answered, Who are you, Lord? And he said to me, I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting. Now those who were with me saw the light, but did not understand the voice of the one who was speaking to me. And I said, What shall I do, Lord? And the Lord said to me, Rise and go into Damascus, and there you will be told all that is appointed for you to do. Now, interestingly, well, we'll get to it a little farther down. He's just giving him the story of what had happened, okay? And since I could not see because of the brightness of the light, I was led by the hand of those who were with me and came into Damascus. And you can watch our video on Acts 9, where we've got the conversion of Saul to Paul. And we talk about all of this in more detail. I'm not going to duplicate that here. And one Ananias, a devout man according to the law, well spoken of by all the Jews who lived there, came to me, and standing by me said to me, Brother Saul, receive your sight. And at that very hour I received my sight and saw him. And he said, The God of our fathers appointed you to know his will, to see the righteous one, and to hear a voice from his mouth. For you will be a witness for him to everyone of what you have seen and heard. And now, why do you wait? Rise and be baptized and wash away your sins, calling on his name. Now, Paul is just recounting what happened, but he's also, in doing this, because he's just giving the historical narrative, telling the gospel. He's talking about Jesus, to know his will and see the righteous one. Every one of them knew who he was talking about when he said, the righteous one. That's the Messiah. And to hear a voice from his mouth, Jesus appearing to you personally, which Jesus did on the road and does again. So Paul is here to this hostile crowd, and many of whom, you know how crowds work. Crowds turn into mobs, and mobs get worked up, and they don't even know oftentimes what it is they're worked up about. Reference Ephesus, where they scream for 2 hours, Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. Okay? Mob psychology. It's a frightening thing. Even gets to talk about baptism. Rise and be baptized and wash away your sins, calling on his name. Whose name? The righteous one. You got to preach the gospel to all these people. Paul's always going to get it in there. And he does it in a way that they wouldn't have started to object to if he stood up there and said, let me tell you about Jesus. Well, they all knew who Jesus was, and most of them weren't for him. That would have gotten a different response. He weaves it into, just uses the historical narrative to present the gospel. But Paul wasn't going to speak to this massive crowd, because in that diagram I showed, it just shows where the fortress of Antonia was. There was plenty of space for a really large crowd. to be packed in. So now he's skipping forward. When I had returned to Jerusalem and was praying in the temple, where was he? He was in the temple. He's a faithful guy. I fell into a trance and saw him saying to me, "Make haste and get out of Jerusalem quickly, because they will not accept your testimony about me." He's just telling it as it is. The Jews aren't going to like you. And he's telling the Jews this. And I said, "Lord, they themselves know that in one synagogue after another I imprisoned and beat those who believed in you. And when the blood of Stephen, your witness, was being shed," back to Stephen, there he is. How did he begin the address? Stephen's work. "I myself was standing by and approving and watching over the garments of those who killed him." Okay, so all this stuff he's getting in here. And this is the hand grenade that's going to send them all over the edge. "And he said to me, 'Go, for I will send you far away to the Gentiles.' And with this, they go apoplectic. Up to this word they listened to him. Then they raised their voices and said, 'Away with such a fellow from the earth, for he should not be allowed to live.' And as they were shouting and throwing off their cloaks and flinging dust in the air, the tribune ordered him to be brought up into the barracks, saying that he should be examined by flogging to find out why they were shouting against him like this." Stop there. Why did they flip out? Why was he arrested? Why had they started this tumult and furor to begin with? Because they accused him of bringing Gentiles into the temple, that holy, sacred place. Remember, they accused Stephen of speaking against the temple. So he says the word Gentiles, and, how they would have felt about salvation going to the Gentiles. Was this just the spark in this charged situation that set them right back to where they were before, yelling and screaming because he's talking about Gentiles? We don't know. But their response is similar, is toned down from what it was with Stephen. Because with Stephen, go take a look at that. Now, when they heard these things, they were enraged. And what was it they heard? Who does he talk about? The coming of the righteous one. Again, people knew who he was talking about, the Messiah, whom you have betrayed and murdered. You received the law as delivered by angels and did not keep it. And what was he talking about before? The temple. They're all about the temple, but you're not really faithful. You just love the shiny, fancy buildings and the power that goes with it. What did they do? Now, when they heard these things, this is Stephen again, what he had said, they were enraged and they ground their teeth at him. But full of the Holy Spirit, he gazed into heaven and saw the glory of God and Jesus standing at the right hand of God. And he said, "Behold, I see the heavens opened and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God." But they cried out with a loud voice and stopped their ears and rushed together at him. Just mad, lunatic furor. They gnash their teeth. They stop their ears. They put their hands over their ears and they charge at him. What kind of behavior is that? Completely what? How would you describe it? One word: irrational. Irrational. Remember, there's nothing rational about unbelief. Nothing rational about unbelief. It's irrational to hate the God who created you, who loves you, who sent his son to die for you. That is all horribly irrational. Now, they probably, likely, would have been every bit as irrational here, but where were they? Who was in attendance here? Who were the guys standing around with spears and swords in riot mode? He was surrounded by Roman soldiers. They were down here. He was up here, and around him were Roman soldiers. This was their fortress. So they'll yell and they'll holler and they'll scream and say that he deserves death and that he ought to die. Away with this fellow from the earth, for he should not be allowed to live. They'll throw their cloaks, dust, and everything else. It's as much of a temper tantrum as they were going to have with Roman soldiers. They weren't going to go and try to take Paul. That would have been a death sentence for them. But the reaction being the same, we've got these clear parallels between Stephen, by Paul's own words, choosing those words that Stephen used to begin his address. Paul uses them here. Violation of the temple, speaking against the temple, and then the irrational response to their defense. Stephen's defense and Paul's defense. And the term that is used here, it's the word when it making a defense. It's the word in English, bouncing around through different languages through time, end up as apology. But properly understood we'll just go to the Greek. In the Greek, it's defense. It's giving the case, making the case. When theologians discuss things, one makes a statement and says why the other guy's wrong, and then that one makes his defense. When we talk about defending the faith against false teaching or accusations, what that's called in the seminary is apologetics. Fancy. It's always 50-cent word with academic. But the same response to the defense that they're giving, it's not apology and used, but the same response. So they brought him into the barracks that he should be examined by flogging to find out why they were shouting against him like this. So think of this. We're going to get to the bottom of this. Let's flog him. Let's stretch him out and take a cat of nine tails and whomp on this guy till he tells us basically what we want to hear. That's exactly what was going to happen. If you think that in this world there has ever been a true justice system, then you're sadly mistaken. I refer to our system today as the injustice system. It's all about profit at every level and control and manipulation of society. It has nothing at all to do with justice. And if you've had any encounters with it at all or are familiar with people who have at any serious level, you'll know that what I'm saying is true. There's nothing new under the sun. There's nothing new. They were going to examine Paul by flogging. Now, there's something that's going to change that. Quite interesting on a number of levels. But when they had stretched him out for the whips, Paul said to the centurion who was standing by, I just love it. Paul said to the centurion who was standing by, like, oh, he's being stretched out. I'm not going to try to enact it here on the microphone. Stretched out, leaned over something with his hands tied and his feet tied, and they're getting ready to flog him. And he looks over at the centurion casually and says, is it lawful for you to flog a man who is a Roman citizen and uncondemned? When the centurion heard this, he went to the tribune and said to him, what are you about to do? For this man is a Roman citizen. So the tribune came and said to him, tell me, are you a Roman citizen? And he said, yes. The tribune answered, I bought this citizenship for a large sum. Paul said, but I am a citizen by birth. So those who were about to examine him withdrew from him immediately. And the tribune also was afraid, for he realized that Paul was a Roman citizen and that he had bound him. Okay, let's talk about it. I thought about, and I might, you'll know if I do, I thought about entitling this video, Paul plays the Roman card. He's going to play the Roman card, right? They're getting ready to flog him. And the funny thing is, he says on down in here, as the conversation goes on, that he was a citizen by birth. He'd told them this twice. They weren't paying attention. In the heat of what was going on, in that tense setting, they missed. He said, I am a citizen of Tarsus in Cilicia. Being a citizen, and I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty details, being a citizen of Tarsus in Cilicia made him a Roman citizen. That was the case in some cities. If you were an actual citizen born, that thing about, like you really belong here because you're born here. In the United States, you can't be the president unless you're born here. But all the stuff going on with citizenship now, not going to get into that. But citizenship certainly in Rome had its privileges in certain places for various reasons. Didn't matter. The reasons could vary. Well, I say various reasons, I guess. If you were a citizen there, natural born citizen, you were a Roman citizen, and it was the high level of Roman citizenship. Because we see the tribune talking about different levels of citizenship. But Paul had told them this twice. Tarsus, citizen of Tarsus in Cilicia. They should have stopped in and said, whoa, wait a minute, are you a Roman citizen? It's like if a cop pulls over a state senator. Do you think they get treated differently? Yeah, they do, usually. Although I do know a story my My dad was a chaplain with the Indiana State Police, and this brand new state trooper pulled this guy over, and he was a colonel in the state police, and he showed him his badge. And the young guy said, yeah, I've got one of those too, and went ahead and wrote him the ticket. You got to admire his moxie. He probably never got out of the patrol car, though. You couldn't bind a Roman citizen. You couldn't even tie him up. And they'd tied him up, hauled him through the crowd, and now stretched him out to be flogged. They were scared to death. And it says, and the way it's worded here in this translation isn't as clear, but when he says, but I am a citizen by birth. So those who were about to examine him withdrew from him immediately. They drew back. They were like, whoa, I don't want to have anything to do with this. Flogging a Roman citizen, I don't know what the penalty was if they hadn't been condemned, and then they probably didn't get flogged. It was different. It's why Paul won't be crucified. Paul gets his head cut off. Quick, painless, really is. Quick, comparatively, painless. Paul was never going to be crucified. He was a Roman citizen. That's why he died differently than Peter. So they're terrified. But you notice he says, the Roman tribune says, where is it? I bought this citizenship for a large sum. Now, how it worked with these people, you could be a citizen, but then for a higher price, you could have a higher rank of citizenship. But you can tell his reaction when Paul says, but I'm a citizen by birth. It was a different thing altogether. Now, here's my question with all of this, because I said it's fascinating on a number of levels that they missed this, that now they're terrified, that they arrested him, and they could have flogged him. You know what that would have meant? But now we've got to ask this. This isn't the first time that's gone down, that Paul's been flogged. Count him. He's going to recount it in 2 Corinthians 12. He recounts all the things that had happened to him. Why? The Roman card now. He'd been carrying this thing since he was born. He didn't pull it out in Philippi, where he got what? Whipped, arrested, put in the stocks. Why now? And the answer is, are you ready? I don't know. We can only speculate. And as I was thinking about this and how to present it, the thought occurred to me, I don't know how it worked for Paul. I don't know how it worked for Peter. I don't know how they knew to heal this person, but not that person, because they were around sick people all the time, but they only healed some of them. It was a fairly rare event. I don't know how they knew which ones to heal and which ones to not heal. Or in the case of Paul, with not long ago from where our text is in Ephesus, was it Ephesus or Troas? The young guy fell out the window, third-story window, and Paul brought him back from the dead. Why that guy, not others? And my answer to it is this, as I thought it through. I've never been an apostle. I'm not going to be an apostle. I don't know how it worked for them. Different set of rules. I don't know how the Lord let them know what to do, who to heal, when to play the Roman card. But him playing the Roman card is going to have a huge effect. We're in chapter 22. This plays out for 5, I guess, however you want to count it, more chapters, all the way through 28, because he played the Roman card, because he had the Roman card to play, because he's in prison now. He's not in prison. He's detained, okay? And he's going to stay detained all the way. The book ends in Acts 28 with Paul detained. And I've just got to ask myself, the older I get and the more I study the scriptures, I've thought about these things from so many angles over the years, read different scholars, been taught by different scholars. I look for new ways to look at things. And one thing I landed on, and this was in Revelation. Why is it in the book of Revelation that the longest section of the book is that the prostitute must die? The death of the prostitute, Babylon the Great. It's the longest section of the book. What does that tell us? I mean, it goes on and on. What does that tell us? It's a big thing. It really matters. In that case, in Revelation, it's something that we have a hard time getting our minds around. The fact that the prostitute, which is the Western world today, make no mistake about it, the great prostitute is the Western world today, and her head is the United States. Pure and simple. Okay? For us to get our minds around the reality that all of the commerce that we see, all of the wealth, all the opulence, that all of that is going to get burned to the ground intentionally by the forces of darkness themselves. Because They're the ones who run it all. It's hard for us to do. And so the Lord Jesus goes on for it for a few chapters to get us to realize, don't get attached to this stuff because it's all going away. It's all burning up. Go watch my videos on Revelation 17, 18, etc. to get all of that. But here, this huge section, far larger. You can go from Acts 20, you can easily 20, where it's talking about him going to Jerusalem and getting arrested all the way through the rest of the book. Chapters 20 through 28, longer than any other key point in the book. Longer than the first missionary journey, second missionary journey, third missionary journey, longer than everything except that apostolic period right there after Jesus had ascended that runs up to about the same length, up to when Stephen is stoned. This is every bit as big. Do you think Luke just ran out of stuff to talk about and the Holy Spirit just said, yeah, just run with this? No, it's important. Paul is going to be imprisoned all this time, and we're going to see the injustice system continue, even for a Roman citizen, and he's going to be able, through all of this, to proclaim the gospel before the powers that be repeatedly. There's going to be shady dealings, them expecting Paul to play the shady games by which they operate, with which they operate, and he's not going to do it. He's perfectly content to end up going before Caesar. You don't get that part. But going before Caesar, that's why he played the Roman card. How he knew to play the Roman card now and not before. Again, I'm not an apostle and I've never played one on TV. For those of you old enough, doctor, but I had commercials back in the 60s. This is important. He's going to go, and Jesus talked about going before kings and all of that. And that is exactly where Paul, the one who had been the antagonist of the faith and now the greatest preacher of the faith, is going to go. All right. So they've got him bound, and now the tribune, and these politics are politics. He's in a spot. He's in a tight spot. Do with this guy. How does he handle this? Because while they were the Romans, this was Jerusalem, and none of these people, the people whom Rome governed, none of them were willingly Roman subjects. They'd been conquered, right? If you didn't do a good job of keeping the peace, Pax Romana, the most important thing, you'd lose your place. You might lose more than that, okay, if you failed. So, and everybody knew that the toughest people to keep in line in a lot of ways were the Jews. It was a given. I think it accounts for a lot of what Pontius Pilate did. You could end up losing your place, and you didn't want to keep authority by force. That wouldn't go well. That wouldn't go well. It was messy, and the Romans didn't like messy and crushing you, at which time all bets were off. So the tribune is in a tight spot. So he's got to figure out what to do. But on the next day, desiring to know the real reason why he was being accused by the Jews, he unbound him and commanded the chief priests and all the council to meet, and he brought Paul down to set before them. So he's going to the Sanhedrin. That's where he's going. Tribune wants to know, we had a big hullabaloo here. What was it about? Because it's hard to discern that exactly. And the things that upset the Jews, the Romans didn't always get. They didn't understand, because the Jews were weird by design. Even when they were behaving and being faithful to the rest of the world, they were weird. They were different, distinct, and set apart. So take him to the Sanhedrin, see what we can. And looking intently at the council, remember how that Sanhedrin worked? Like a little amphitheater. They're all around him. And what do you think? Let's just go there. You know who Paul is. He was the protege of Gamaliel. He's smart. He doesn't play the political games anymore, but he knows them. He knows them well. He had advanced beyond all of those his own age. Rising star, we would call it. He knows exactly who these people are. He knows exactly how they operate. And he knew full well what his chances of having anything positive come from this interaction were. They were going to listen to a thing he said. They didn't have to listen to a thing he said. They could say anything they wanted, and it all would have been lies, because that's what we've already seen from yesterday, right? What we saw with Stephen. There wasn't going to be any justice. So Paul knows just what to do. Brothers, I have lived my life before God in all good conscience up to this day. And the high priest Ananias commanded those who stood by him to strike him on the mouth. And Paul said, God is going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. Are you sitting to judge me according to the law, and yet contrary to the law you order me to be struck? Those who stood by said, Would you revile God's high priest? Paul said, I did not know, brothers, that he was the high priest, for it is written, You shall not speak evil of the ruler of your people. He's just quoting, let's see, from Exodus 22:28. This scene, it's so hypocritical because Ananias, by their own laws, had no right to have Paul struck. They hid behind the law and they obeyed none of it. Even the law that they added to the law, there's the book, The Illegal Trial of Christ. Every single thing that happened in Jesus' arrest, trial, was against the law. It was against Jewish law. They just broke all of it. And we see the same thing here. You couldn't order someone to just be struck, but that's what Ananias does. And I love Paul calls him a whitewashed wall. What's a whitewashed wall? Whitewash is something, it's not like paint. It only lasts for a short period of time, and it has to be reapplied and reapplied. And you can see through the whitewash what's behind it. If you've ever tried to, we've got the paints we have today and they're amazing, but if you go to paint over something where there's an oil stain or something like that on the wall, it'll bleed through. When you see that, think whitewash, because it's really hard to cover up what's underneath it with whitewash. There's even one Mark Twain story about painting the fence, whitewashing the fence. He had to do it every year. And they'd have to do it, and he tricks his friends into whitewashing it for him. I can't remember the name of that story. But anyway, he's saying, everybody can see exactly what you are, you lousy hypocrite. But he wasn't going to use those words exactly. But this is pretty powerful stuff. God is going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. He says, you're breaking the law when you command me to be struck. And then when they tell him, you dare revile God's high priest. I love this one. Oh, I didn't know, brothers, that he was the high priest. He did too. You couldn't miss it. He had a seat in the middle of all of it. It's like, it's tantamount to saying, if you're in the House of Representatives and the speaker's up at the podium, oh, I didn't know he was the Speaker of the House. But it's a dig. Why is it a dig? Because he's saying you're not acting like the high priest. How would I know you're the high priest? You just ordered me to be struck. He's feeling his oats here, and he's not going to mince words with them. But when it's pointed out and he's corrected, he rightly says, oh, I wouldn't have said that then. I didn't know, because you're not supposed to speak against the ruler of your people, which almost is a dig as well, because the ruler of your people is this corrupt, crooked guy right here, right? So Paul is playing coy, right? He knows where he is. He knows he's been there. And they all know who he is. Now, when he perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other part Pharisees, he cried out in the council, Brothers, I am a Pharisee, a son of Pharisees. It is with respect to the hope of the resurrection from the dead that I am on trial. And when he had said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. For the Sadducees say there is no resurrection, nor angel, nor spirit, but the Pharisees acknowledge them all. Then a great clamor arose, and some of the scribes of the Pharisees' party stood up and contended sharply, We find nothing wrong with this man. What if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him? And when the dissension became violent, the tribune, afraid that Paul would be torn to pieces by them, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him away from among them by force and bring him into the barracks. Okay, again, this is understated. Paul knew exactly. He knew he could look at them by the way they were dressed and tell who the Pharisees were and who the Sadducees were. And remember, the Pharisees were laymen. They weren't priests, the Sadducees. And I've got to do more digging, and I've never really found something that satisfies me as to what the Sadducees actually believe, because they don't believe in the resurrection or angels or spirits or any of that. And interesting. But it's always a little ditty I learned to keep it straight is the Sadducees don't believe in the resurrection. That's why they're sad. Pharisees were laymen who were wealthy, and spent their time studying. They knew the word and they paid the scribes. The scribes are with the Pharisees. They paid the scribes because if you're going to have a scribe, you had to be able to pay them, and they had to be trained, and they made good money, right? So the Pharisees and the scribes are aligned. So you notice later it's the scribes whose spirit or an angel spoke to him. But Paul knew exactly what this was going to do. He knew there was going to be no justice. So before he had played the Roman card, now he plays the Pharisee card. Because of the hope of the resurrection of the dead that I'm on trial, he knew, just as you know, wherever you're watching, and it varies from state to state, municipality to municipality. It varies from, with national governments, but there are issues that if you throw it out there and take a stand on one point or the other on a contentious issue, it's going to turn into a Donnybrook. And so guess what? Paul got exactly what he wanted. He got a Donnybrook because he knew the Donnybrook would get him out of there, because nothing good was going to happen here with the Sanhedrin. No justice was going to take place. He would receive no justice. Not possible. It was just going to be a mess. So, it's like going to Thanksgiving and there's going to be a fight, and let's just get it over before dinner starts. I'll say this one thing that's going to set Uncle Larry off, and off it goes to the races. And then maybe by the time we eat, everybody will be worn out and we can sit down and enjoy a nice meal. Same thing. He just blows the place up, and he knew exactly what he was doing. He played. So we got the Roman card. Now we've got the Pharisee card, and they just go ballistic, going at it back and forth. And what happens? That they went out of their minds is shown by the fact that when the dissension became violent, the tribune, afraid that Paul would be torn to pieces by them, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him away from among them by force and bring him into the barracks. So back we go to the fortress of Antonia, and escapes the Jews again. But I think it important to notice, there are a lot of times that Paul will just play meek and quiet, be the lamb and not the lion. Here, he's the lion. He's not going to have things get all tied up with them when nothing positive is going to come from it. And he's on the right track. He's on the right track. The following night, the Lord stood by him and said, "Take courage. For as you have testified to the facts about me in Jerusalem, so you must testify also in Rome." Again, never been an apostle. And I'm not trying to say that in some light and frivolous way. I don't know how it worked, but here, you think of what Paul has been through. And yeah, he's the Apostle Paul, and he's a faithful guy, but the Lord stood by him. What doesn't it say? What does it say and what doesn't it say? He stood by him. Jesus right there, not some apparition that he could see through. The real Jesus came and stood by him. Think of Genesis, where the different times that something big goes on that would have caused Abram to lose faith, make him question, make him doubt as he waited through those 25 years for the birth of his son, and the Lord would appear to him. The Lord would appear to him. Lot chose the best land for himself. The Lord appears to Abram. All these different things happen. The Lord comes and appears to him. The Lord here comes and appears, stood there and said, "Take courage, for as you have testified to the facts about me in Jerusalem, so you must testify also in Rome." And we'll go take a look just briefly. John 16:33. "I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world." Take courage. I'm in charge. I'm always in charge. No matter how it looks, I'm always in charge. Why do you think the lords of darkness want a one world government? All of it under their control in one place? It's always a cheap, nasty imitation of the real thing. The one who is really and truly in charge of all things eternally is the Lord Jesus Christ. And so they seek to displace him with their own copy, right? But Jesus is the one who's really in charge. And take courage, for as you have testified to the facts about me in Jerusalem. What is our job as believers? What are we to do? Are we to convert everyone? Not what Jesus says here, does he? Ultimately that's the goal, but it doesn't always happen. As you have testified to the facts about me in Jerusalem. That's almost legal parlance, right? You've testified to the facts. Maybe not a single person out there believed, but the gospel is being proclaimed to all nations, and then the end will come. So as we live in this latter day, not knowing what might come, not knowing if the death of the great prostitute Babylon is coming sometime soon, our job is just to witness, proclaim the truth. And it's so important. We see here in our text that Jesus came and stood by Paul to give him this assurance. Could have spoken to him through the Spirit and just let him know, but no, he physically appeared and let him know. Take courage, for as you have testified to the facts about me in Jerusalem, so you must testify also in Rome. And it's going to take some time before he gets there. And as I read through the section, what goes on, we're going to stop here for today. But all the time that Paul spends locked up, I mean, not like in a jail cell type locked up, but being detained in some really beautiful places, but still being detained. And he had to be thinking, I could be out on the road. I could be back to Corinth. I could get to Spain. Just get me out of here. But Jesus let him know, so you must testify also in Rome. That's what the Lord wanted him to do, testify in Rome. And I think that understanding that in Paul's mind, he wants me to testify in Rome, whatever it takes to get there, I'm going to keep this in mind. This is now my mission. The Lord said, you're done with the mission trips for now. Now I want you to testify in Rome. And who better to testify in Rome than Paul, the Roman citizen? All right, we're going to stop there. Do appreciate you watching. I hope these videos, these teachings are a blessing to you. And I know that they are because some of you reach out to me. I encourage you, reach out. You can go on my website, and hit the link. It's up there at the top, right up here. Here's my website, right up here, contact. You can click on that, takes you to a form, and you can send me a message. Just comes to my email. You can find all our Bible videos out here on all the different books of the Bible that we have done. It's a great resource. I encourage you, come check it out. We do appreciate you watching. I do hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. This is Matthias 76. Thank you, and God bless.